Thank you, Senator Whiteman. You've heard the opening to LB 99. The floor is now open for discussion. Senator Chambers.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Whiteman, I'd like to ask you a question or two about this bill.
Senator Whiteman, would you yield?
Certainly.
Before I go into what you're talking about, would you turn to your green copy of the bill on page 2? And I'm going to start in line 3 where it says, a receiver may be appointed by the district court. Are you with me there?
Yes.
Okay, now this is the language I want to discuss with you. In an action by a vendor to vacate a fraudulent purchase of property. Is a vendor a seller or a buyer?
A vendor is a seller.
Well, why would the vendor want to vacate a fraudulent purchase if the vendor is selling it rather than purchasing it?
Well, I think this isn't the portion of that section being amended,
I know.
Senator Chambers, but
you're the expert, so I'd like you to tell me why a vendor is going to try to vacate a fraudulent purchase when the vendor is not the one purchasing.
I don't know why that situation may exist, but I suppose that a vendor could have been defrauded into selling a property by giving them false information with regard to the property. And a purchaser might be trying to vacate that, and that could be the situation.
You mean the seller is trying to vacate it?
Trying to vacate the sale, I suppose.
So then why doesn't it, okay, to vacate a fraudulent purchase? Thank you. I'll ask Senator Ashford a question or two, if I may, then I'll come back to you.
Senator Ashford, would you yield?
Senator Ashford, did you follow the discussion between me and Senator Whiteman?
About the fraudulent purchases?
Yes. Did you follow that? And do you agree basically with what he gave as his understanding of why that language might be there?
Why don't we go back over it again, Senator Chambers?
Okay.
I was reviewing the section 2 as you were asking.
Okay.
The question.
It's on page 3.
I'm
okay.
You are. I just.
In an action by a vendor to vacate a fraudulent purchase of property. The vendor is selling the property. So Senator Whiteman's reasoning is that the purchaser is the one who committed the fraud.
Right, but that, in this case, I think it's, again, my understanding, and Senator Whiteman can certainly correct me, the vendor, would be a case where, I believe, where the property is security for a particular transaction. And I believe that's why it is in this section.
So then the property, here's what I'm asking though, if the vendor is the one selling, why would it say that the vendor wants to set aside a fraudulent purchase?
Because there was fraud in the transaction.
By the purchaser.
By the purchaser. And somehow the purchaser has defrauded the seller either as to the ability to pay or for the use of the property. There could be a laundry list of conditions that would be in that transaction.
Thank you. And I can accept what you and Senator Whiteman said. Now I will return to Senator Whiteman if he will answer another question.
Senator Whiteman, would you yield?
I will.
Senator Whiteman, in looking at the committee statement, only one person other than yourself appeared to speak on this bill. Do you remember offhand who that person was?
I believe it was
1 minute.
I believe it was Bob Halston.
And was he speaking for himself or representing an association or organization?
Well, he may have been speaking for himself, but he was also representing an association. And
what association was he representing?
Well, he may have been representing more than one, but I think he was representing the state bankers.
He was so the state bankers want this bill. Is that your conclusion from the fact that he came and spoke in favor of it?
I think they do want the bill, yes.
Thank you. And I'm going to stop now, but I turn my light on, Mr. President. Thank you.
You may continue, Senator Chambers.
I've asked Senator Whiteman all that I need to ask him on that score, but I have another question I'd like to ask him if he will yield.
Senator Whiteman, would you yield?
Bill.
Senator Whiteman, have you been asked to introduce any other bills in which the bankers have an interest, or is this the only one?
I believe this is the only one.
Could you talk in the mic so it would be recorded?
I believe that this is the only one.
Thank you. And you have a mellifluous voice, and I want to be sure everybody hears it.
Thank you.
Now, I have taken, for a certain reason, a very keen interest in every bill that the bankers are interested in. I'm now more interested in their bills perhaps than they are. Would you be willing to let me bracket this bill until a week from today and discuss it again at that time? That means set it aside for a week and then resume the discussion in a week. Or would you rather not do that?
I would rather speak with somebody else before I answer that question.
Would you say it in the mic? Because I didn't even hear what you said.
I said I would rather speak with someone else, my aide, before I answer that question.
Somebody else your age?
Yes.
I'm older than you. Oh, what did you say?
I said an aide.
Oh, an aide. Okay. Well, I'm going to continue talking, and would you be able to speak to that aide while I continue talking?
I will do that.
Thank you, Senator Whiteman. Members of the legislature, the bankers, they are not my favorite people anyway. And when the bankers come here with heartless activity, not on this bill, they have another thought coming if they think that I'm going to let them mess over the people who mean something to me, and then they're going to have legislation that will pass through this legislature like digested food out of the system of somebody who's consumed an entire box of X-Lax. You talk about an effluent, which was discussed on Senator Johnson's bill. That's what's going to look like is flowing out of the Bankers Association when I get through with them this session. A bill that is on the agenda today is coming up. And I would hate to have Senator Whiteman's bill get whipsawed. But I'm going to have to spend some time on Senator Whiteman's bill this morning. And for those who understand that the word time can have different meanings, every now and then there's a part of a poem written by Edgar Allan Poe that I like to quote. Mr. President, how much time do I have speaking? Do I
2
have
minutes.
remaining? 2 minutes. I wonder if I can get it done. I might be able to, but I think I will not try during these 2 minutes. I will talk them away, put on my light, and show the bankers. There's a judge named Coffey in Omaha that I will be dealing with, not on this bill, and show how the floor of the legislature is, in fact, a bully pulpit, a platform and a forum for issues of importance to be discussed. Each of us has his or her own standards and will determine what is important, but nobody determines for me what is important for me. And when the bankers decide to take a position,
1 minute,
which I think is unconscionable, I feel a personal responsibility and a public responsibility, meaning to look out for those people who would be harmed by the inappropriate conduct of these bankers, to speak in their behalf on this floor because they are not here. And now that Senator Whiteman is back, I will ask him that question, not right now because there won't be enough time, but when I'm recognized the next time. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Chambers.
Yes. Mr. President, members of the legislature, the bill before us has considerable merit. I did not vote when the time arrived for the committee to decide what it would do with this bill. I did not vote for it. I did not vote against it. I made no attempt to hinder it. And right now, I have no opposition to the bill itself. Just like if a highwayman stopped me on the highway and put a pistol against my temple and said, "Give me your money." Well, I've got nothing against this pistol, but I got something against the highwayman and the use being made of that pistol. So I have nothing against this bill. I have nothing against Senator Whiteman, but I have something against those who want this bill, namely the bankers. And they're going to find out that not only will they be in a battle for the rest of this session, if they can persuade the senators to go along with conduct that I think is hurtful to homeowners, the session is going to be poisoned. Now, you all may find what I'm saying to be somewhat on the mysterious side, but all things will be made plain when the time is right. Oh, there's that word time again. Hear the tinkling of the bells, silver bells. What a world of merriment their melody foretells. How they tinkle, tinkle, tinkle. That's not really the way the poem goes. But a lot of people would not know whether it was right or wrong unless I say so. But that's how you get people's attention. And somebody is going to look at Edgar Allan Poe's poem, The Bells, and correct what I just said that may be incorrect. But this part is correct, where he said, keeping time, 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 in a sort of runic rhyme to the tintinnabulation that so musically wells from the bells, 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 from the jingling and the tinkling of the bells. So there will be time, time, time taken. But before I do it, I'd like to ask Senator Whiteman a question.
Senator Whiteman, would you yield?
Yes, I will.
Senator Whiteman, are you willing to bracket or postpone discussion on this bill for a week after having had your conference?
No, I am not. I would ask for an up and down vote today.
Well, are you willing to discuss this bill for another week, Senator Whiteman?
If there is sufficient discussion, but I don't think it would take another week, and I would like to discuss it now.
Well, it wouldn't take a week for sure, but when it gets involved in other things, it can take a long time. How long are you willing to discuss this bill? For how many days, I mean?
I would like to have a vote on it today.
Well, Senator Whiteman, I'd like to have $1 million today, but I'm not going to get it. So how long are you willing to discuss this bill? Are you willing to discuss it the rest of the morning if that's necessary?
I would much prefer not to, but if need be, I guess.
I'm not asking what you would not. I'm asking what you would be willing to do. Are you willing to discuss it the rest of the morning?
I'm willing to discuss it as long as it takes to bring it to a vote.
If it takes tomorrow, are you willing to continue the discussion tomorrow? If it takes that long, you said as long as it takes. If it also takes tomorrow, are you willing to continue tomorrow?
As long as it takes, Senator Chambers.
So if that includes tomorrow, your answer is yes, you're willing to discuss it tomorrow, right?
Well,
which is Wednesday. And you'd be willing to discuss it Thursday.
1
correct?
minute.
all I can say is I'm willing to discuss it as long as it takes.
We're going to see. How long do you think it would take?
Oh, I'm hopeful that maybe about a half hour.
Oh, you optimist, you. Thank you, Mr. President. To show how collegial I am, I'm not going to take all of the time I have to speak on this time around, but I'm going to speak more.
Thank you, Senator Chambers. Senator Whiteman, followed by Senator Ashford. Senator Whiteman. Senator Whiteman.
Could I yield to, or I'd ask Senator Ashford to yield for a question.
Senator Ashford, would you yield?
You had indicated to me that you saw no problem with bracketing it, and I guess I would like to know your reason.
Well, I appreciate your question, Senator Whiteman, and I think that what we have here are two bills dealing with banking issues. Clearly, your bill is meritorious and needs to be advanced. I think it's a legitimate question. The other bill that Senator Chambers refers to has to do with the homestead exemption, and that bill in bankruptcy proceedings or in creditor rights proceedings. And that bill essentially raises the homestead exemption to $60,000 from $12,500. Both bills I'm sure others have interest in both those bills, but clearly the banking industry has an interest in both those bills. And I would be willing, Senator Whiteman, if you would be willing to spend some time in the next week to discuss both bills, but clearly the other bill that's of interest to the banking industry, so that possibly we can present to the body in a week, some sort of resolution of these matters to keep general file moving ahead. If you would agree to that, I'd be more than happy to work with you. And I know we've had some discussions about it, and I'll take full responsibility. I know you don't want to do it, but I think I would be more than willing to help you on it with some of these bills. You don't need help on your bill, but to try to break some kind of a log jam here.
Senator Ashford, I fail to see where the two are connected in any way. It seems to me this bill should go forward on its own merits and not be tied in any way to the bill that would increase the exemptions in bankruptcy or the homestead exemption. So I would ask to proceed with this bill.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Senator. Mr. Clerk, you have a motion on your desk.
Mr. President, Senator Chambers would move to indefinitely postpone. Senator Whiteman, you'd have the option to lay the bill over at this time, Senator, or take the motion up. What is your preference?
We'll take the motion up at this time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Chambers, you're recognized to open on your motion to indefinitely postpone motion 14.
Thank you. Mr. President, members of the legislature, often there will be what's known as an innocent bystander. Somebody may be caught in a crossfire. That means the person caught in the crossfire is not a participant on either of the hostile sides that happens to be between them. The bankers are the ones that I'm going after, and I make it crystal clear. Unlike some of my colleagues, you won't have any problem understanding what it is that I have on my mind. Now, on occasion, I might keep you in suspense for a short time. Variety is the spice of life, and everything shouldn't be absolutely predictable. But you will not have any doubt, if you pay attention, as to what I'm dealing with and what I'm concerned about. This bill is not even worthy of a great amount of discussion on its own. But the bankers are used to coming into this legislature and skating across it like one of those professional or Olympic ice skaters. Many times, they have not crossed me, so I let them get what they want if it's something I don't have a feeling about one way or the other. This would be one of those kinds of bills, but they've gotten on the wrong side of me. Mr. Hallstrom, their lobbyist, has not said anything which I felt was untoward, insulting, or disrespectful. He just happens to be the water carrier for the wicked ones, a part of the axis of evil. And I'm not going to tell you right at this point who the other members of that axis are. You don't have to be feeling sorry for or sympathetic toward these bankers. They run everything. They probably got some of you all in debt up to your eyeballs, like that poor fellow on the commercial says. What they like to do is encourage people into debt. If I'm going to enter into an arrangement with a banker, and I say, in exchange for you lending me this money for a period of time, I will put my farm up. And if I can't pay you, then you liquidate that farm if the amount is large enough to justify you in liquidating it, and you take what I owe you. And as time goes on, the value of that farm may not cover the amount that I owe. So if my equipment had not been a part of the collateral, then that loan could be considered what some people call classified. It's shaky. So I say, well, I don't want you to go after my farm, so I'm going to put up my equipment. I've got a combine out there as wide as a jumbo jet, and I'll put that up. And things go bad, and now that won't cover it. And eventually, everything that I own is collateral for a loan, and I'm unable to make the payments, and they come in and take it. When I put up property of any kind as collateral, I know what I'm doing. I know what I'm getting into. I hope it won't come to this turn of events, but I could conceivably lose that property. But when we have a set of circumstances where some of the most savvy dealers in money are doing everything they can to encourage people to take these credit cards, to max them out, after they know they've gotten Congress to say, we fixed it now, so once you get your hooks in them, they won't be able to get away because they can't go into bankruptcy, and you can take everything they've got. We can have them paying you for the rest of their life. And what we'd like to do is have them will that debt to their children so that their children will continue paying. And if they don't do that, then we'll just take everything that they've got. You think these bankers don't understand what they're doing when they line up these ducks and try to make it easy for people to get what they call easy credit? You think they're doing it because they're philanthropists? No, they have created the circumstances which will guarantee them what they didn't have before they did that. They want to fix it so you cannot get out from under the debt that they almost beg you to get into. I say this: let the banker, the card company, beware. If you have a practice and a policy of hustling these people into debt, then you're the one who's going to assume the risk. You need to be more careful about those you extend unsecured credit to. And if you did not do that, then the punishment goes with the foolishness. You were foolish to do it, and your punishment is that you're not going to be able to take this person's home. And the legislature will stand between you, who are the, what do they call them, Carcharodon, the great white sharks. How much time do I have this time around, Mr. President?
A little over 4 minutes, Senator.
Thank you. There was this judge in a rural court, because that's where this would have to be more or less, and this poor old farmer was going to lose his property. And the bankers, fat, sleek, faces shiny, got watch fobs, striped suits. The wrong kind of stripes. They ought to be a lot bigger, and they ought to have a ball and chain attached to their ankle, but that doesn't happen to them. And they're happy because they know they got this farmer. And they've intimidated the jurors because the jurors are in debt to the farmer, to the bankers too. So although there's some question here, when time comes for the verdict, the jury says the banker wins. And the judge looked at him. He looked at the bankers. He said, I'm setting this verdict aside. It's not justified by the evidence. And I want to tell these bankers that at least in this county, it takes 13 men to steal a man's farm. You got 12 in the jury, but the 13th is the judge, and you ain't going to get him today. I'm the 13th man. And the bankers may wind up getting what they want, but they ought to, as wise as they are, total up the cost and go through a weighing process. Is that which is in the left hand worth giving up for what you think you might get in the right hand? What kind of bills do you have that you want the legislature to pass? And for those legislators who are new, you can stop me. How? Invoke cloture, the rule of 33. You and 32 of your colleagues can stop me. But here's what your colleagues will have to ask themselves. You did it for the bankers. When you get a bill, will you have all these people supporting you against me? Or does each one say, I want you to support me, then the rest of you are on your own? Beard that line in the den by yourself. I'm not down here to win friends. If I can, that's a bonus. I'm down here to stop the oppressors from being like the dish who ran away with the spoon being the goods of those who cannot help themselves, the dish being the bankers. Are all bankers wicked? I don't know. Are some bankers wicked? Unquestionably. I did a little research on one of those scriptures, and it didn't say it's harder for a rich man to enter heaven. It's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than a rich man. It said through the eye of a needle than a banker. It's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than a banker. In other words, the ordinary lying, cheating, thieving, will not pay his income tax rich man will go through the eye of a needle even easier than a banker. Y'all feel so sorry for the bankers, don't you? I feel sorry for people who, because of the vagaries of this society, will get into serious trouble because those who know how to trick people are allowed to do so with impunity. But I'm the 13th man, and you're going to have to beat me by the rule of 33. And I don't care if you attack every bill that I got, because those bills are not my life or my wife. But your bills mean a lot more to you. I don't have strings pulling on me. You all have some people who sent you down here to do some things, and you may not be able to do them. Now, are the bankers worth that much to you? And you know what they'll tell you? Don't let Chambers do that to you.
Senator Chambers.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Chambers. Senator Ashford, followed by Senator Whiteman. Senator Chambers. Senator Ashford.
Thank you, Mr. President, members. I think Senator Whiteman has asked a good question.
First of all, I would like to explain why, in my opinion, these two bills are not two bills that ought to be tied together at all. They're two completely different types of bills, provide different remedies. LB 99 provides a mechanism for the appointment of a receiver where at least there's been some question as to whether that receiver could be appointed in instances, and it's done sometimes, believe it or not, to protect the debtor as well as the creditor. Sometimes the debtor has abandoned the property. In our area, we have situations where we have people from other countries, a lot of people from other countries who may have gone back to that country on a temporary basis, but is given a bank, or is even, and it's certainly true in the Hispanic culture that a lot of those transactions take place between two people, not a bank under a deed of trust, but under an individual who secures his debt under a purchase by a deed of trust. And the contract seller, and I shouldn't call him a contract seller because if he's operating under this bill, he will be secured by a deed of trust. And under that deed of trust, if the buyer of that property is still owing a debt, has gone back to Mexico or whatever country it may be, and that property has been abandoned and it can't be sold right away, and there's been a hailstorm or whatever there might be, and the roof of that house is leaking, it could be necessary and advisable to have a receiver appointed, which the court would have the power to do. And so I don't want the members of this body to have any apprehension that this applies only to bankers. It does not. It's much broader in scope than that. We talked about even the situation where perhaps a vendor in a fraudulent purchase might be entitled to have one appointed. And so I think we should continue with debate and that this bill should be separately determined, the fate of this bill, separate from LB 237, which has only to do with the amount of homestead exemptions in the event of a bankruptcy or somebody claiming that his property is exempt.
Senator Whiteman, you're queued to continue.
I'll yield the rest of my time at this time.
Senator Chambers, followed by Senator Woolman. Senator Chambers.
Mr. President, members of the legislature, the Bible said, "Be ye not unequally yoked together." And I think that's the principle that Senator Whiteman is invoking this morning. But never having been one to be swayed by theological arguments, that cuts no ice with me whatsoever. Everything in the legislature is related to and linked to everything else if somebody chooses to do that. The analogy I give is that of a spider web. If it's one of those circular webs, the spider can either sit in the middle of the web or go someplace off in a corner in the shade and just sit back and wait for a fly or some other trespasser who cannot disentangle itself from the web. But the web is constructed in such a way, there's such an interrelationship among and between all parts, that when any part of the web is disturbed, that disturbance is transmitted, communicated throughout the rest of the web. So if somebody chooses to tie two bills together, somebody will do it, and I will do it. This bill is tied to the other one because the bankers are bringing the bills. Now, why do people say Jesse James and Frank James in the same breath when one worked on the railroad and the other was a banker? What's the similarity between robbing banks and robbing railroads? But they always hook them together. There are many things which people in this legislature need to learn. And they need to learn something about me early on. Many of you may have read a story written by Robert Louis Stevenson called Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Dr. Jekyll was the goody-goody two-shoes doctor, but he experimented and delved into things which no Christian man ought to delve into based on what the characters in the story thought. But he delved into them anyway. And he felt that if the right concoctions were made from chemicals, you could separate wickedness in a person's nature from that which is good. So that is, in an oversimplified way, the story behind Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. He succeeded in doing this. And it reached a point where Mr. Hyde would take over Dr. Jekyll. And Dr. Jekyll's actual physical contours would change. When he became Mr. Hyde, he would shrink down. And the clothing was too large for him. But as he continued in the character of Mr. Hyde, it was more and more difficult for him to find his way back to Dr. Jekyll. And he noticed that Mr. Hyde was growing larger and larger. Mr. Hyde was the wicked portion. So whenever somebody wants to talk about a split personality without using that term, they'll say this person is a Jekyll Hyde. But there are some football players who had an inkling of what that was. So instead of saying this is a Jekyll Hyde, they say this is a Heckle Jekyll. Well, people use what is familiar to them. So they knew about Heckle and Jekyll, but they didn't know about Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Well, maybe I've been mistaken for Dr. Jekyll. And now you have a chance to see Mr. Hyde. And Hyde was more clever than Dr. Jekyll. Mr. Hyde could think on his feet more quickly than Dr. Jekyll. Mr. Hyde knew how to survive in circumstances when Dr. Jekyll did not. But as those stories in those days had to end,
1 minute.
Mr. Hyde met a bad ending. And when Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde met the same fate, people were supposed to get some kind of lesson from that, and I don't know what it was. But I use that to give an example of how I function. And I'm far from being through with this bill, and I'm even farther from being through with the bankers. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Chambers. Senator Whiteman.
Well, again, I would like, Lieutenant Governor, member of the body, I would like to reiterate the fact that that the bills that Senator Chambers would like to tie together or delay this bill until enactment of 237 or a vote on LB 237 are really just not connected bills, and at this point we do not feel that it should be tied to LB 237, which has totally separate subject matter from this one. Affects different classes of people. Certainly they may both have some effect upon the banking.
Mr. President, members of the legislature, the Speaker is exercising his prerogatives as Speaker, and he's working something out, so I'm going to continue speaking so that we don't have to just sit here doing nothing. And quite frankly, I'm enjoying this opportunity. I thrive most when everybody is on the other side. That's when I thrive. I'm looking back at Senator Pauls. Usually when I look at him, I look at his angelic face, and the better angels of my nature usually spread their wings, and just a warm glow comes all over me. But as I look back at him today, he's right there with all the rest of them. He's a fallen angel, but he can be restored to grace. He can be restored. On these kind of matters, I want Senator Whiteman to understand, since it's his bill, that it has nothing whatsoever to do with Senator Whiteman. It could have been Senator Fulton with the bill, Senator Carlson, Senator Wallman, anybody else. It could have even been my bill. But if it were mine, I would withdraw it. But since that is not my prerogative, I'm going to exercise my prerogative. And I say again, the heavier the odds against me, the more I thrive. And the bankers have decided they're going to put me in my place this session. And I challenge them, put me in my place. And let the legislature be where you spread my blood out for everybody to see. Show these people in Nebraska that somebody knows how to handle me and make me shut up and take low. That's what they need to do. And it's just like if I'm in a fist fight with somebody. In the old days, that's all we did, Senator Carlson. We wouldn't pick up a knife or a gun or a stick. You took your lumps, and that was it. But nobody could whip me one time. Nobody could knock me down one time, and it's over unless I'm knocked out cold. They better be ready to fight me every day, and they better have as much determination as I've got, or they are going to crack and they are going to lose. I've got to be here 90 days. It makes me no difference what I do during those 90 days. I'm going to be here every one of those 90 days unless I'm dead, in which case I think people will understand my not being here, but I'm not planning to die. And on that score, an American and a guy from Australia found themselves on the same battlefield. They were allies, and the Australian had been there before the American got there, but the American didn't know how long, and the conditions were terrible. And this American was crying, Senator Fulton. He said, they sent us over here just to die. And the Australian said, they sent us over here just to die. So it depends on how things are pronounced sometimes. It depends on how the words come out as to what people's reaction is. Now, let's say I was speaking strongly against people who owe debts to bankers. There wouldn't be the negativity that might be growing now. But there are people here who can identify with bankers, and you all will have your opportunity to do the work of the bankers. But you'll know this, you don't have a weak person who doesn't know how to fight, who cannot fight, and who will roll over, swallow spit, and take low. The bankers created this situation, and they're going to pay. And if they want to make the legislature pay, I don't care. The play by Shakespeare, I think, dealt with the banker when it talked about getting a pound of flesh. But somebody was clever, and they said, that's all you can get is the flesh. You can't take any blood, and you know the story. Bankers want that pound of flesh, but they're not going to get it easily, not as long as I'm here. And if you all know the bankers, go talk to them and tell them.
1 minute.
Either stand up to me or understand that there are issues that are more important and they ought to pick a different day and a better issue to fight me on. But for me, this is a very important issue. Not this bill, but the one where they want to take somebody's home. Not even a $60,000 exemption from their greedy, grasping, clutching fingers. How much is $60,000 when it comes to buying a house? Look in the newspaper and see. They can still put the person out in the street if that's what they want. We ought to do something about the way these credit cards are hustled. And we cannot interfere with interstate commerce, but we can set up some kind of regulation of what happens to people when they get in debt. And we ought to make the credit card hustlers pay. If you entice somebody
Senator Chambers.
into debt, it's on you. Thank you, Mr. President.